Hello, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining us. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone today's event is hosted by the National Council of Jewish Women Pittsburgh. NCJW is a progressive Jewish feminist organization that has become a powerful force for social change, advocating for racial and gender equity in the Pittsburgh region. For more than 125 years, through our advocacy efforts and service programs, our mission has always been to step forward, speak out, and stand up for the needs of women, children, and families. And we are thrilled that you are joining us virtually today as we discuss healthy homes. My name is Abby Krekel, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager at Moms Work NCJW. And yeah, a bit of housekeeping. First of all, my kids are homesick, so we might have some interruptions. And for all of our attendees and presenters today, same goes if a cat, dog, or child wanders on screen. If you need to take a bite of your sandwich, this is the lunch hour and life happens, and Mom's Work is the place to be yourself, right? So I want to go ahead and introduce Hannah, our presenter today from WE, Women for a Healthy Environment. Hannah is the Healthy Homes Program Manager and has been with WE, my favorite organizational acronym ever, for 3 years and has a strong background in public health. So take it away, Hannah.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Abby, for having us. This is an exciting, collaboration. We love partnering with, community agencies, and this is a really exciting new partnership. And so I'm excited to be here today. So yes, thank you for that introduction. My name is Hannah Beatley. I am the Healthy Homes Manager at Women for a Healthy Environment. And so, excuse me. This is just kind of like a little bit of an overview of what we're going to cover today. We'll talk a little bit about our agency, spend a lot of time talking about, a healthy home, what that means, the different elements of a healthy home, the different environmental health hazards in our home that we can think about. And then I want to spend the most time talking about what the resources are, what we can do about it, and who we can get connected to in Allegheny County and throughout our different neighborhoods.
Great. This is so important because I think it can seem so overwhelming. Like when I was writing up some of the write-ups for this event, I was saying even just the environment in general can be so intimidating and scary, and you feel out of control, and you're like, well, the place you can start is in your own home and in your own family, right? I think that's, you can kind of wrap your hands around some of these issues, and that's what I hope we can achieve today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll honestly, full transparency, I didn't know most of this stuff until I started working for this agency. And so it's, a lot of it is just trial and error and just general consumer awareness, and that, you shouldn't need a PhD to be able to create a safe space for your family. And so that's really, what is at the core of our programming, is to educate, but also to provide resources, tangible next steps, things that you can do to make it a little less intimidating to kind of address some of these hazards in your home. So thank you. I appreciate that. It is really important, and full caveat to this conversation is know that there are resources, and we want to be one of them. So will be a lot of information. It'll be a lot of maybe some new things, maybe some things you've heard before that might just be a refresher. But know that we want to be as much of a resource and partner for you all as possible. And so our agency, we are an environmental health nonprofit. Our office is located actually right in East Liberty, but we primarily focus on community-based public health and how health impacts, or how the environment impacts our health. And so we do that through a few main program areas, that being our healthy homes, our healthy schools, our healthy early learning. And then we have a few branches of those programs that include our bigger community health initiatives and our health policy, which is really focused on advocacy around some of these environmental health issues. And so I'll breeze through that because I just said all of that. But today we're really going to focus on housing and health. So I mentioned we had a few other program areas, one of those being our early learning, which is really focused on the daycare setting. So we have a lot of resources for that space. Another being our healthy schools program. And so really focused on the time that we spend in our school buildings. And so we have a lot of resources for that. So I will just plug those. We won't talk about those too much today, but know that, if you work in a childcare setting or if you work in a school, know that there are resources for those spaces through our agency as well. So really we'll like I said, we'll focus really on, housing and health and the different elements of our homes and what that means, for not only our home safety, but also, our just general well-being. since we do spend so much time, especially in the last, 2.5 years now, in our homes. And so, a lot of this is just a lot of words to say that housing is health. Housing is public health. Housing is at the intersection of a lot of the health outcomes that we're measuring, some of those being cancer, respiratory conditions like asthma and allergies, lead poisoning, different things like that. And that relays into, things like missed school, performance in school, missed days at work, ability to be able to thrive in our home environment, being able to breathe, being able to drink clean water. And so that really intersects at all of the things that we're talking about today. Housing is part of, the public health, social ecological model that we think about, and is really at the intersection of all of these different health outcomes and health issues that we're thinking about when we, measure the health and safety of our communities and of our homes. And so, one thing that we do try to, highlight is that impacts people at different rates and different, higher rates depending on where you're at, and not only Allegheny County, but the United States as a whole. And so we'd be remiss to not say that, environmental health hazards, especially what we call environmental justice communities, are definitely impacted by things like racist policies and systemic, racist issues. And so we really want to make sure that, we do highlight that is, not just one of the things that impacts, just housing. And so really had the big takeaway here is to just know that housing is part of health. There's a lot we can do about it. But we cannot create healthy environments for families until we address, the policy and equity issues at the forefront of housing as this public health issue. And so kind of this big caveat to say that we're going to talk about a lot of stuff. And unfortunately, some of that is just because of the systems we have and the systems we've created for communities to be in. And so just know that, we want to do some work not only in our home environment to address what we can do, but also know that there's bigger systemic policy initiatives that we can be working on too.
No, this is so important. I love what you said, just like housing is health, and it's just incredible how intersectional so many of these issues are. I mean, even just from an equity perspective of like, a renter has only so much control over their environment. Like if you're a family who's renting,
Right.
well, what's your landlord done and what risks exist in your home? And like, what can you do about it? Like as a renter compared to a home, there's just so many
Exactly.
different things that are at play here that I'm just so excited to learn more.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about that because we do, that is such a unique place to understand, homeowners have a whole slew of things that they have to be worried about. But as a renter, you come into that space like a little bit more cautious, a little bit, not so eager to sometimes bring up some of those issues for fear of, retaliation, eviction, different things like that. So it's definitely pros and cons to both spaces, but, definitely different spaces to navigate. And so what that kind of relays into in terms of, what we'll cover today, when we think about, what is a healthy home, we think about these principles that were developed by the National Center for Healthy Housing. And that's really, the things that are pretty straightforward that, we'd all want and we can all kind of think pretty clearly about. So dry, clean, pest-free, so, the little critters, safe, thinking about, injury prevention, burns, poisoning, that kind of stuff, contaminant-free, which we'll spend a little bit of time talking about, ventilated, so, clean air coming in, maintained. That's a really big one when we talk about, our old and aging homes that we have in Allegheny County, and then thermally controlled. And so especially as we get into the colder months, we'll talk a little bit about what that means too. And so how these healthy homes principles relay into the kind of more specific environmental hazards that we'll cover today are things like lead and lead poisoning prevention, mold and moisture issues, radon. We'll talk definitely a little bit about radon today, and understanding, what we can do in our homes around that. And then kind of a bigger kind of bucket of indoor air quality being our cleaning products, safety, personal care products that we're using, how we can address and, hopefully minimize and avoid the little critters in our home, especially as, we dive into the colder months. And so that's kind of like areas of focus we'll cover today. We'll throw in a few here and there that might not be on this list, but kind of how those healthy homes principles relay into what we'll cover. And so, Abby, I love that you literally said that because this kind of caveat around tenants is usually at the beginning of our conversation because, we're going to talk a lot about different environmental hazards. And as a tenant, it might feel a little hopeless. Like, what do I do about this? I I rent and I can't change some of the conditions in my home. And so know that as a renter, everything that we cover applies to you. We have a few different, levels of tenant protections in Allegheny County and the state of Pennsylvania. One of those being what's you see there as under like that protections under state law, what's called the warranty of habitability, which is like a lot of words to say that you're entitled to like a safe and habitable space. And then one other thing that I will plug too is that in Allegheny County, we do have our own health department. And so you can, file any type of, complaint or anything that you would want to raise to the health department for an inspector to come out. I do know that that can sometimes be a scary process. So one thing that we will plug here and again at the end when we talk about resources is that there are a lot of legal aid teams in Allegheny County. We work right now with Community Justice Project and Neighborhood Legal Services, which are really great advocates for tenants, even just to help you think about the language you want to use when communicating with the landlord, knowing, what to do in terms of keeping a record of what you've asked for, in terms of some of the repairs that you might need. And we'll talk about this specifically with lead poisoning as an example, but under certain, habitability issues, the landlord is required to make certain repairs in a certain time period in Allegheny County because of our housing code. So all of this to say, know that if you rent, there are a lot of supports and systems that we can help you navigate and get connected to. And so know that this can also apply to you and that habitability is absolutely something that we want to help you think about in your space. Anything you want to add to that, Evie?
In my own personal life, I've helped a lot of friends. Like I was a renter during, sort of when the whole lead pipe thing here in Pittsburgh. And I helped a lot of friends kind of navigate that, like as renters, and also just another friend, like, your heat, if your heat shuts off in the winter, it's like they have to fix it within like 24 hours, I believe. Things like that it's just giving people that confidence to advocate for themselves, because it's hard sometimes to take up that space.
Yeah.
And even if it's going to annoy your landlord, like it doesn't matter, like it's your home.
Right.
And I'll give a quick plug for the children's rooms at the courts. NCJW, we one of our projects besides Mom's Work and Thriftique is we have free high quality childcare babysitting at the courts. So if any of this would kind of escalate to needing to go to housing court, we got you. Like your kids have a really fun place with like, there's turtles, there's like, they can bring home new princess dresses or new cool sneakers, that kind of thing. Books, everyone leaves with a book. Just kind of like something to always keep in mind if you're ever going to court for any reason, we got you.
I didn't know that. So that's even something I learned today. So that's awesome.
There you go. I'll get you a flyer.
Perfect. Okay, great. So that is just kind of our rental caveat. And then now we'll kind of dive into these environmental hazards. So we're going to start with lead. And the way that we'll kind of think about this is we'll think about our actual home built infrastructure. So, our walls, different things like that that are physically there. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the products that we're using. And so what we can do about those different spaces. And so right now we're kind of in the nuts and bolts of our walls, our floors, our baseboards, our windows, our doors, different things like that. And so many of us are probably familiar with lead exposure, lead poisoning, whatever term we want to use today, in some capacity. I know Abby had mentioned, back in like 2016 with the city of Pittsburgh and PWSA, an exceedance of the lead and copper rule. Also back around that time with Flint, Michigan, and lead in drinking water being something that was really, publicized and something that a lot of us, were maybe a little bit familiar with or were familiar with in the 90s, and they got re-familiar with, with the rise of Flint, Michigan. And so, lead it's a industrial, it's a long-term issue that we still are dealing with, but it is preventable and it is something that we can, do something about. And so lead, just in terms of background, is a known neurotoxin. And so that means that it is harmful to human health, specifically though, can impact things like our brain and our nervous system, leading to, cognitive issues, behavioral issues, long-term, chronic disease and chronic issues. But really we think about that, in terms of like the cumulative negative impacts that lead can have on, our lifespan, not just in children, but, across our whole life. And so we do primarily focus a lot of our prevention efforts around children under the age of 6, because that's when, we're creating really important brain pathways, and our brain is work in overdrive, to do all these things, to retain information, to, create, really important, like I said, really important brain pathways. And lead can impact that because it is a neurotoxin. So it impacts our nervous system. And so it's really important, not only to really prioritize our prevention efforts, but to also really just understand what that means. And so the common sources of lead, specifically in the home, but this can kind of relay into a daycare setting or the school setting, is really, we think about this in a few different ways. Primarily in our home, though, because in Allegheny County and in most older cities, we have really old homes. We have over 80% of our homes being built before 1978. 1978 is kind of this year that we use as a year to kind of assume lead hazard or lead risk in a home, because that was the year that lead-based paint was banned from residential use. However, most homes built before 1950, that was when it was widely used. It did start to fizzle out and became a little less common after 1950, but anywhere between that 1950 to 1978, it was still legally allowed to be used. However, we've known that lead as a harmful, product for a really long time, but it was durable and it was malleable, and it was something that from industry standards was a really great product. So people still used it. And so the way that we see how that kind of relays into, lead hazards in our home is through lead-based paint and dust being a big part of that. And so if I live in an old row house in Lawrenceville. If you look around and you see, chipping or peeling paint, anywhere where that paint would be considered, not intact. So chipping, peeling, deteriorated, anything like that could be considered a lead hazard. And then, if you think about, yeah, go ahead.
No, just that example picture that you have there is a fantastic example of like what it is looking like
right.
That lead paint. Do not breathe it, right?
Right. Right. Especially in Allegheny County, like so many of us, I'm sure, have seen that, have that, are dealing with it. And so, that would be considered a lead-based paint hazard. But then also, if you think about, where we typically see that kind of paint is on things like window frames and windows and doors and baseboards, sometimes just painted walls in general. And so then when you're thinking about that lead-based paint hazard, where you're creating friction, you're also going to have a lead dust hazard. And so, like I said, that's, thinking about those areas where, we're opening and shutting doors, opening and shutting windows, where we're playing, where we're spending a lot of our time. And so that's typically, what we'll think about in terms of lead-based paint. Lead dust, I will just say that for children, the primary route of exposure is actually direct ingestion of lead dust. And if you think about it, kind of makes sense. They're crawling, they're exploring their spaces, but they're also putting their hands in their mouth, and they're doing the things developmentally that, we want them to do. It's just that they might be doing it in a space where there's lead dust and lead-based paint hazards. And then, we'll spend a little time, the kind of other more prominent route of exposure is through our soil. And that's through a few different ways. One of the big things that we can think about around soil is demolition. So where old homes have come down and they've maybe not been, taken down in a lead safe way. And so that dust settles in the soil. And then that can create a lead hazard in the soil, especially if you live in or near where there might have been a recent demolition or just vacant property. And so, Allegheny County Conservation District has done a lot of work to test some of this urban soil to have a better understanding of what, some of those levels are. And then another kind of thing that we think about is like industrial sources. So old lead smelting facilities. We used to have lead in our gasoline. And so, prior to about like the 1980s, 1990s, you went to get gas and it had leaded gasoline. Now you see we buy unleaded. But, that's part of emissions. Those emissions settle in soil. And so, anywhere where there might be bare soil, that could be considered, a lead hazard, depending on what the levels are. And so we'll talk about what that looks like in terms of what we do about that. But the key thing there is raised beds. So if you
if gardening concerns are there.
Exactly. And like obviously for flowers and stuff like that, it's not so bad, but the big things that you'd want to be concerned about is bare soil and in near like play areas. So where there might be like a little play gym or things like that. And then if you're using that for, gardening. And so the big thing for that would be to use a raised bed, and to not use, the soil that's just naturally there in your yard. And we'll cover some of that stuff too. And so this Fourth bullet here is probably the one that we're the most familiar with, is lead in drinking water. And that's really through our plumbing fixtures. So that's through the lines that connect both the public and the private side to the water main. It's through maybe some of our old fixtures, like the fittings that we have along our pipes. And so that's actually the primary way that lead gets into the drinking water. So it's kind of a misconception that it's, it comes from the actual treatment facility, but it's actually from our fixtures. And so we have these old fixtures, the lead actually just leaches into the water and then comes into our water supply. And so that's a primary route of exposure. I will just plug that, there's a lot of great work happening right now where we're putting a lot of funding into our infrastructure around lead service lines and replacing them in whole. And so, we have some local water authorities, PWSA being a big one, that has committed to removing and replacing all lead service lines by 2026 and doing them in full. And so really what that means is that they're replacing both the public and the private side. If you only do one, you're actually going to cause a temporary spike in that lead level, and it can be more harmful than had you just left it alone. So it's really important that, when we're talking about water and we're talking about lead in drinking water, that one of the big things we're advocating for is full lead service line replacements. And that is something that PWSA is committed to. Other water authorities locally are now kind of moving in that direction and utilizing some of the state and federal funding that we have for this. And then this last kind of bullet here is kind of those more unique exposures, but something that's still very important to think about. Some of that being, old wooden or passed down toys, some of the pottery and dishware that we might have, cheaper, costume jewelry, different things like that. And one thing that I'll flag, and that we'll have another slide specific to that too, is things around like certain hobbies. One of those being, certain hobbies or occupations, being, if you work in construction or home renovation or repair, that can be, a big lead, a big route of exposure for lead, especially if you're doing that in Allegheny County where we have really old homes. And so just, other routes to think about. And we already kind of covered this, but this is really just like honing in on what that looks like in terms of, why are we still talking about lead? Why is it something we should care about? This is really, the takeaways. It is no neurotoxin. We talked about that. Long-term issues like damage to the brain and nervous system. It's really been linked in terms of like how we measure this to IQ points, ability to perform in school, slow growth and development. That's kind of how we, kind of can measure some of this impact, but really, across our lifespan. And so really understanding that, it is, a long-term issue that we'll kind of face for a while. But the really important thing here, and one of the key takeaways, is that we can prevent lead poisoning. And so and I can provide print versions of this too, Abby, for you guys, but this is also available on our, we have a Get the Lead Out Pittsburgh public awareness campaign right now. And it houses all of the resources that we'll talk about, all of these different, materials that you can find, different, just understanding what lead is if you want a little bit more information. But this is like the 10 things that you can do. We talked about a lot of them already, but I'll really just highlight one of the big ones. And that's in Allegheny County. We have what's called a universal screening mandate. So if you see at number 9, where it says get tested, all children at ages 1 and 2 are required in Allegheny County to get tested for lead. It's typically starts with a finger prick. If that finger prick comes up high, they'll do a confirmatory venous draw. So just know that if you, are due for a child well visit, and you don't know if you've gotten that done, flag that to your pediatrician. Know that that's something that we should be doing and that it actually is required in Allegheny County. And so know that, if you are concerned about insurance or anything like that too, the county health department does also offer that screening for free. So that's one of the big ones. We're one of the only counties that does require that right now. And so know that, that's something that we want to make sure we're doing to make sure that we're testing our children, knowing where those elevated lead levels might be. But one of the big things that we want to do, and what we really hone in on in terms of prevention, is not waiting for children to get poisoned before we respond. And so knowing that in our home, we can do some things to prevent exposure and to prevent lead poisoning. And so we talked about a lot of those ones, but the big ones being, looking around, looking at the condition of your paint, knowing, that if it's chipping, deteriorated, crocodiling, whatever fun adjective we want to use to say that it's not intact, know that, that's somewhere where we can start. A big one, we talked about water. If you aren't sure of, whether or not you have a lead service line, or if you have old lead fixtures, a good rule of thumb is to use an NSF certified water filter. We have some that we can help families get connected to through our Healthy Homes program. Other things that you can think about too that we've already kind of talked about, but I'll just make sure we hone in on is number 6, and that's really around what's called lead safe cleaning. And so if you think about, where those high friction areas are, in and around window frames, doorways, different things like that, prioritizing what's called lead safe cleaning, which is really just a fancy word to say wet cleaning, so that you're not just using like a dry duster where that dust just moves from one place to another. You're using, mops, you're using wet rags, wet paper towels, anything like that. And just honestly, like hot soapy water or anything that you can do in those spaces to actually remove some of that dust and not just kind of move it from one place to another. And so that's really important. And if you can prioritize that in the places that you spend the most time, that can really go a long way. And so all these other things, I'll make sure we have this, but I do want to kind of keep going because we have a lot to cover in this session, but know that there's a lot of resources for that and that we can help you get connected to that. One last thing I'll plug, just because we did talk a little bit about, people who work in renovation or who just like to do fun DIY projects in our home. In COVID, we kind of saw that there was a big spike of people who had time on their hands and could finally knock down the wall that they wanted to knock down, which is fun. That sounds fun. But just know that if you're doing that in a home that's built before 1978, that there are some protocols you'd want to follow around, doing that lead safely. And one of the big things for that is really containing the dust. So using wet methods when you're sanding, using plastic coverings and different things like that to cover and contain those spaces. And so obviously, if you are, doing that and you're just a handy person and you like to do that, there's a lot of resources through our website and through the EPA. But if you are, want to hire a contractor, know that there is a certain certification that those contractors are supposed to have. It's called the RRP, Renovation, Repair, and Painting. That's kind of that last bullet there you see on the bottom of the page. So if you are in the market for hiring a contractor to do work in a pre-1978 home, this is something you should definitely be asking that they have and show you. And that basically means they've gone through a training that they can do that work lead safely. So just kind of our caveat that, if you're going to do that, know that there's resources to do it in a lead safe way. So we'll kind of switch gears from lead into kind of our bigger indoor air kind of conversation that we'll have, and we'll cover like radon, mold, and cleaning product safety. But, we kind of just, this bigger bucket of indoor air quality is really just thinking about, we spend, over 90% of our day either in a home, in a school, in a work environment, but somewhere indoors. So it's important, not only for people with asthma and other respiratory conditions, that we really do maintain healthy indoor environments. And that can be, really impactful, not only, like I said, not only for people that have asthma or allergies or other respiratory conditions, but for anybody who's spending a lot of time inside. And so we kind of think about that in a few different ways, like I mentioned, but we really just, we'll cover that, like I said, in a few different buckets. One of the first ones when we talk about, environmental health, especially in Western Pennsylvania, as a state, is something called radon. And I'm sure many of us have heard of this in some capacity, whether you've recently purchased a home or have purchased a home before, or just, are in the know on some of this stuff. But radon is it's a radioactive gas that is absolutely naturally forming. So there's nothing anybody has done to put it there. It naturally occurs in our Earth's crust. And so, nothing we did to make that happen, but it is something we do have to respond to and we do have to deal with. And so one of the things that, we talk about here is that radon is a known carcinogen. And so it actually is the number one leading cause of lung cancer among non-smokers. And so what's also a little crazy about that is that it's odorless. You can't smell it. You can't see it. It's a gas. And so it can be really tough, to have that on your radar, to know that that's something you should be, thinking about in your home. But I will say that, at point of sale, caveat to that, because 2020 and 2021 were crazy years for buying homes, it's typically required that you test your home for radon. However, you can waive that. And I think a lot of people did. So just know that that is something that, we should be thinking about. And one of the big things that we want to make sure we cover here today is that it's best to test your home for radon in the winter months. And that's really just because you're getting the best picture of what that level is, because your windows aren't open, you're not moving throughout your house as much. You don't have as much, natural circulation of air. And so you get the best picture of what your radon levels are in the winter months. And so January is actually Radon Action Month. I'll make sure, and I'll put this link in the chat, and I'll send it to Abby too, that we have it. But through the American Lung Association, you can request a free radon test kit, or if you want to, you can purchase one at any, like Home Depot or any big box store like that. It runs anywhere from like $15 to $30, depending on whichever one you want to get. And basically, it's a super easy test. You keep it in your basement for like 1 to 2 days, send it back to a lab, and it gets you, and it gives you the level. So 4, I'll kind of skip ahead here. So 4 is kind of the cutoff, the threshold. I will say, that's not necessarily a health protective number. So we'd want to make sure we're doing something if there is any radon detected. And that kind of fancy unit we use is picocuries per liter. You don't need to know that. But 4 is kind of that cutoff. So if it was above 4, we'd want to make sure that you were getting connected to a certified mitigator who would install what's called a radon reduction system. And so this is kind of a map for us to just see visually, like, where are we at? What does that look like for us? And so you'll see Allegheny County runs pretty high. We have a pretty high potential. And on average, we run higher than that 4 picocuries per liter threshold. And so you see that's kind of throughout the different pockets of the state of Pennsylvania, but the state of PA on average also runs higher than the national average. So geographically, it's just something that we deal with because we have hills and valleys, we have winters, we have seasons, our earth moves, and that can just, make that a bigger hazard. And so know that you should be testing annually, test in the winter months. You can get a free test through us and through the American Lung Association, or just at, Home Depot next time you're there picking up something. So that's kind of the big takeaways for that. So just, if you have any questions, please reach out to us, but know that that's something that you should do annually that most people don't realize. And I didn't know until I started, working in this job. And so something that, we all deal with, it's Western Pennsylvania. We have old homes, we have flooding, we have leaks, we have all the naturally occurring things that can cause moisture and water in our homes. So then we are dealing with mold in whatever capacity that looks like, whether it's, in a bathroom, in a basement, in an attic, in some way. I'm sure all of us have had to deal with mold in some capacity. And so many of us know this already, but mold is a fungi, can be found indoors and outdoors, but it's really the mold spores that are really the tricky, issues here. And they really thrive in damp conditions. So anywhere where you have moisture, there can be mold depending on, what that surface looks like and what the cleanup looks like. And so it does, thrive pretty much on really any kind of surface, but definitely thrives on things that can trap and hold moisture longer. So things like carpeting, things like paper, things like ceiling tiles. So, like those old ones that can like crumble as you're literally looking at them sometimes. And so that's really where it can be like some of the most tricky areas to get and to deal with, but it really can thrive anywhere where there's moisture. And so when we talk about mold, we really highlight that because mold is one of the biggest triggers for people that have allergies and asthma and any kind of real respiratory condition. And so that's kind of why we come at this from like an environmental and health perspective. Is because it is, a known allergen. It's a known asthma trigger, especially. So if you have anybody in the home that has any type of, respiratory sensitivity, mold can be really harmful. And so when we think about mold, the biggest takeaway that I can say is, prevention. So, and one of the big things for that is maintaining humidity levels in your home. And so if you know that you have a really humid basement, so thinking about, controlling for that with a dehumidifier, different, things that we can do to dry up some of those spaces, is really helpful. One of the biggest things that I know many people are dealing with in Western PA, when it comes to like a post-flood event, is how we clean up the water to avoid the mold. And so that is really key. So trying to get as much water out within those first 24 hours after a flooding event can really go a long way. And so that's something that unfortunately it's just the nature of climate change. It's the nature of our infrastructure. It's just, it's kind of some of nature just working against us. But it is just also the nature of like the way that we build our homes in Allegheny County too, is to not be so weather resilient. And so it's just something we're all dealing with, and, know that there are some resources for that. One of the big things that we can think about too is, ventilation. And so that's really around when we talk about, some of the more annoying mold that we have to deal with, like our bathrooms, our kitchens, different things like that. So knowing that whenever you're creating a lot of steam, so if you're taking a really hot shower that day, try to, run that fan as much as you can, maybe even crack a window if you notice that it's getting really, sticky in there, maybe even crack a door if if you know that like that air is just, that moisture is just sticking there, because that's really when we're going to see mold thrive. And one of the big things that I'll just say, and then we'll kind of switch gears a little bit too, is that, some of our default is to just like get any product we can and dump it on the mold and it'll go away. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. And that can almost just leave you, you spend a lot of time, maybe a lot of money on a product, and it'll come right back. Really, the key is to physically like remove those spores. And so depending on the surface, sometimes you might have to actually cut it out if it's a ceiling tile, or if it's, something that's built into like a wall. But if it's like a bathroom, like tub or shower, something like that, really the best thing that you can do is to actually like get some type of abrasive, material. So like a bristled brush, anything like that, and like really put some elbow grease into it and remove that spore. Dumping a bunch of bleach on it isn't really going to help you. It'll just come back. That spore will just sit on the surface, and the next time you shower, you'll see it again. And so it's really about removing the spore, or removing, wherever you had that water damage. That's really going to be, the long-term solution. So just kind of the caveat that, I even grew up thinking that too, like, oh, you have a little bit of mold, just dump some bleach on it, it'll go away. But it's going to come right back. And so just know that there's some resources for that, know that there's some best practices, and really prevention and humidity control can really go a long way when we talk about mold. Okay. This last kind of bucket of indoor air quality before we dive into, cleaning product safety is really around critters. And so dealing with things like cockroaches, mice, things like that, and knowing how to prevent those. And that's really around what's called, this fancy term again, that's just called integrated pest management. And all that really is specific to is thinking about where pests thrive. So they need to have food, shelter, and water. How can we limit that? How can we get rid of that? And how can we kind of prevent that? And so really the big key things there are minimizing clutter as much as you can, using like, any kind of like vacuum or anything like that to get as much crumbs and spills and anything, any kind of food off of the floors, off of the counters, anywhere that they can get to, that they're gonna, be able to use that food as fuel. And one of the other things that we like to think about is, thinking about where there's cracks or openings. And so again, we're in Western Pennsylvania. We have random holes in our floors. We have random cracks and seals, that can be a great gateway and a great opening for some of these critters to get in. And so if you are just like kind of taking a look around your house and you notice like a random little like crack or hole, things that you can think about if you can't, actually address that issue, it's things like steel wool. Many critters can't chew through that. So sealing up those cracks and holes as much as you can, putting in things like steel wool, or just like even caulking anywhere like that, can be really helpful, especially as we get into the colder months, and those openings are going to be a lot more, a lot better for those critters when it starts to get cold. And so that's, a really important thing. And then the only other caveat that I'll say is, if you get to a point in, dealing with pests and you have to use pesticides or anything like that, sometimes we get there, sometimes all these preventative controls don't always, sometimes that happens, and that's okay. Just know that if you're using those products, that you use them properly, and that you follow all of the instructions on the label and use proper PPE, because those products are meant to kill. And they have very toxic, chemicals and ingredients in them. And so not meant for us to, be using too much. And so just know that if you have to use them, that's okay. That happens. Just follow the instructions as much as you can, and just think, be very proactive in thinking about your own safety when using those. So we're going to kind of fly through these next few slides, because I want to spend a lot of time talking about the resources. And so, this last kind of element of, our indoor air quality and just our general home health and consumer awareness is thinking around the products we use. So the cleaning products that we have in our home, and also kind of the personal care products that we use. We could come back and have probably a whole nother hour conversation just on, cleaning product and personal care product safety. So we'll kind of breeze through this, but know that, we have a lot of information and a lot of education and a lot of resources in this space. So we talk about cleaning products specifically, we're thinking about our traditional products that we use to clean, sanitize, and disinfect our spaces. And so those can be linked to, health outcomes that we've already talked about and that we measure. So things like asthma and allergies, some known carcinogens and some cancers that are linked to some of these specific products or chemicals that we're using in these products. Burns, poisonings. I think we're all pretty familiar with that. The Mystery X sticker being on a lot of stuff that can be found under our sink. And this last kind of element being hormone disruption. And so thinking about the chemicals that are in these products and how they can impact our health. And so these kind of like common chemicals that we think about specifically in cleaning products, but then also in some of our personal care products are the things that make them, antimicrobial chemicals. So, killing microbes and bacteria. And some of those are known. So you see like all these, like I said, all these like long, incredibly long, kind of hard to read chemical names, but really those as classes of chemicals that we think about, some can be helpful for sure, especially as we think about COVID and safe cleaning practices. But some can also just be harmful. What is the active ingredient in those, can be, linked to things like, linked to things like quat-based products that you see there that are actually known toxic products and are linked to things like endocrine disrupting chemicals and some of our other health outcomes that we'll link this to. Again, I'm breezing through this, so this is a lot of information right now, but one of the big things that we'll talk about too in terms of our indoor air quality is that last bullet there, those volatile organic compounds. And so basically that's a fancy word for the chemical vapors that come off of the common household items that we use. So our cleaning products, some of the deodorizers that we use, air fresheners being a big one, paints and adhesives being another big one there too. And so we'll talk about these as just like different parts of the products that we use and the different ways that they can impact our health. So VOCs, phthalates being known endocrine disrupting chemicals, fragrances, and these antimicrobial agents, all being these specific classes that we, will consider. And so that kind of relays into these very specific ingredients. And these are just a short few that we just used to highlight. Formaldehyde, ammonia, bleach, chlorine, all those things that we've definitely heard before that are known respiratory irritants, formaldehyde being a known carcinogen, these quat-based products, like I'd mentioned, being known irritants. And so some of these products that we know, we've seen before or a lot or have used a lot, especially ammonia, bleach, and chlorine, know that, while we're highlighting a lot of the stuff that you see on the shelf, know that a good alternative to these are things like peroxide-based products. So thinking about, if your favorite disinfectant that you want to use is Lysol, they have a peroxide-based disinfectant. They also have an alcohol-based one. So, isopropyl alcohol, just the regular rubbing alcohol that we use. Many products now have peroxide alcohol-based, citric acid-based ones that have those same qualities of a disinfectant, but without some of that, more toxic products being used in them. So I'm highlighting a lot of stuff that you probably have under your sink. And so I'm, again, another caveat, don't throw away a bunch of stuff because that is silly and you spent money on that and that doesn't make sense. And so know that, maybe the next time that you run out of your favorite disinfectant, the next time you're at the store, we can be, you'd be like, oh, that Hannah told me I could look for maybe a peroxide one. Maybe let's see what's on the shelf. So don't go throw away everything. That is just not, it is unfortunately, and we'll get to that slide next, it is unfortunately just the market that we're in. It is not anything us as consumers have done to do that. The onus is not on us. And so just know that, this is just a giant caveat to you'll get a lot of information, but don't, go home and throw away everything. And so we'll talk about this in a few different ways, but really in terms of, cosmetics, it's very vague how the FDA, defines it, and it's even more vague how they regulate it. And so really the key takeaway here is that not only do we not regulate most of the products that are on our shelves, but what we're using as, kind of the minimum standard isn't even that. There's no health protective, testing for, the vast majority of the products that are on our shelves. And so just again, another caveat that it is not on us. There's the onus right now as consumers is unfortunately that there's really no health protective, regulations or, bodies that are doing much in this space. So unfortunately, as the people purchasing these products, we have to, kind of know what to look for, what to avoid, until we have better regulatory systems in place. And so when we talk about personal care products, we're thinking things like our lotion, our body washes, our hair, shampoos, our deodorants, different things like that. And so a lot of this does relay from the cleaning product to this personal care product space. But I will say, especially in women's products, these endocrine disrupting chemicals, in the last 20, 30, 40 years have really skyrocketed. And so you'll see things being marketed as like paraben and phthalate free. And that's because those are, like I said, those are in that class of chemicals that are known to cause hormone disruption. So that's linked to things like early puberty, having issues with reproductive health and maybe fertility, different things like that, that, obviously impact our health, especially women's health, but even, across the board. Formaldehyde, being, like I said, not only a known carcinogen, but also a known respiratory and skin irritant and allergen. And that can be seen primarily, not so much recently, thank goodness, a lot of companies are, kind of phasing this out, but was primarily used in a lot of our nail polishes, especially those that had, very vibrant colors. And so I highlighted just a few here because, it is unfortunately just something that we just have to know a little bit more about until we have better regulatory, stipulations for the people that are putting this on the market. So the last one that I just want to kind of flag is this kind of term fragrance. So to you and me, that means just anything that smells good, anything that adds a scent, which I love things that smell good. I'm sure you love things that smell good. Everybody loves when things smell good. However, kind of this loophole, I guess you would say, is that fragrance from a business perspective, from a consumer product perspective, is considered what's called like trade secret. And so because, an agency or a company has found, this great combination of all these different chemicals to create this good smelling product, they don't have to tell you what's in it because they've developed it. It's their scent and they don't want somebody else to steal it. And so that is why, fragrance can be a combination of over 3,000 different chemicals, and over 90% of those are synthetically made and are linked kind of into that bucket of endocrine disrupting chemicals, like I mentioned, and that is not disclosed. So if you're, nearby and you see like a hand soap or something like that, if you turn the back of that hand soap and you look at all the ingredients, one of the last things you'll see is just fragrance. We don't know what that is. That could be a combination of, like I said, over 3,000 different chemicals. So just know that that is something that, is not usually written explicitly for the consumer to know. And so it can be a little tough. And so one of our best rule of thumbs is where you can go fragrance free. Some stuff you don't want to budge on, and that's okay. Just know that, if you really love a certain body wash and you really love a certain something else, and you don't want to, do that there, maybe start with something a little bit easier, like your detergent or your hand soap. Some of that stuff can, be slow transitions that you can make where, you can go kind of in that fragrance free route. One other thing I will just say, because we're seeing a little bit more of this now, is this term called greenwashing, which is really where companies are using things like green and earth and sustainable and eco-healthy, but there's really no standard for what that is. There's no definition. Nobody's regulating, what that means for these products. And so, really the only thing certified organic in our country right now is meat. And so it's your chicken, is your the meat that you're buying at the store. Unfortunately, when you see these types of terms being used on products, there's absolutely zero standard for what that means. And so just know that, like, sometimes, if it looks cool on the front, you still got to read that ingredient list and kind of see if there's anything that we can flag. So it's a lot of information. And like I said, you shouldn't need a PhD to know what shampoo you want to buy. And so know that there are a lot of resources. One of them being, we have a lot of DIY information, using things that you already have in your home. Like I said, going fragrance free where you can go a long way. But there's also some more, tangible resources like online databases that have QR codes and scanning tools for when you're in a store that can help you kind of make these purchases a little bit easier. So this is our DIY cleaning sheet, different things that you can think about around things that you already have in your home and in your pantry. So vinegar, baking soda, peroxide, all being things that are widely used in the products that we buy at the store that we could just make in our home. However, not everybody has time to do that, and that's okay. But know that there's resources for that. And the one that I just want to spend 1 minute on is what's called and this is just one variation of this resource. There's a few other ones online that can be helpful too. I just grabbed some screen images from what's called the EWG, the Environmental Working Group. It's a national environmental nonprofit, and they do a lot of work around cleaning product safety, personal care product safety. So it's a browser and it's an app. And basically you can scan different products in your home and it'll give it kind of a rating. It'll tell you why it's maybe rated poorly, why it's maybe rated okay. And they have different, different things to think about. I will just say it almost always flags fragrance. And so just know that if you are kind of scanning different things in your home, know that that will probably almost always get flagged. But it is really helpful to flag some of those other ones that are really hard to maybe find on a label, or just know what they mean on a label. And a big one of those being those endocrine disrupting chemicals. So those parabens, those phthalates, and then another one of those being anything that has really harsh, antimicrobial products in them. So we think about that in terms of like the bleach, the chlorine, and the quats, those kind of 3 different classes of chemicals that are usually those active ingredients in our ready to use disinfectants. One more thing that I will just say before we dive into additional resources and then wrap up is that, it's a kind of a common misconception that, especially with COVID, I think everybody, I did too. We were all like, disinfect everything, wipe down the bags, get it all, disinfected and sanitized and everything. And so I do think it is important to just flag that, in our home, in a residential setting, not in a daycare setting, not in a school, not in a hospital, but in our home, very rarely do you need to, disinfect certain things. Obviously, where you're cooking raw meat, you're using, preparing food in the kitchen, 100 million%. But, whenever you're just cleaning, your coffee table or your walls or different things like that, soap and water, really the big thing for that, or any kind of, all-purpose cleaner, you really don't need a disinfectant for all of those. And really the big thing there is that the key thing that you want to do when you're cleaning those surfaces is remove dirt and grime. And so you want a surfactant to do that. And soap is a much better surfactant than some of those sprays that you put on those surfaces. And so that's kind of just my caveat, that you don't always need a disinfectant where you think you might need one. Obviously, the high touch areas, doorknobs, different things like that, we want to absolutely follow those protocols. But spaces that you're just kind of hanging in, you more often than not don't need to disinfect. And so we'll transition kind of back into the more like built-in home environment really quickly around some of these resources that I do just want to flag really quickly. So we talked a lot about lead at the beginning of this conversation, and I do want you to know that not only do we have the health department in Allegheny County who does provide home lead tests where children have been found to have an elevated lead level, we also have what's called the Allegheny Lead Safe Homes program. And this provides free home repairs to renters and homeowners in Allegheny County if you qualify. And so those are really the key things here, is that you live in a home built before 1978 and that you meet those income kind of guidelines and eligibility guidelines there. So I'll make sure that Abby has this link too, but know that that is a completely free resource. It's a HUD funded program that's operated out of the county's economic development department. So I did want to flag that there are some resources for that. And that within our agency and our Healthy Homes program, we have our community health workers and myself that we offer what's called our Healthy Homes checkups. And so it's really just a way, it's no formal inspection, it's nothing like that, it's just a way for us to help you think about all the things we talked about today. So lead, air quality, the cleaning products we use, radon, mold, different things like that in our home environment, and help you get connected to not only the resources that we can provide, but the additional housing resources and social service programs that we can help you get connected to. So we have internal resources, we have additional grant funding, and we have partners that we want to make sure you know about the services that they provide. And I just plugged a few of those here. We talked a lot about these already. Those legal aid for tenants. If you need additional supports around housing renovation and weatherization programs. Not only do we have a program within our agency specific to asthma triggers and asthma trigger reductions, but Rebuilding Together Pittsburgh also has some home repair programs, and so does Action Housing. So know that there are a lot of resources. There are a lot of different places that we can point you to, to start making some of these small steps and maybe even some of the big steps. Some of these agencies have weatherization programs, have roof programs, but know that there are a lot of resources right now in Allegheny County, and there will be more. We have more federal funding than we ever had to invest in our homes. And so we're hoping that we can see that, really trickle down into Allegheny County and invest in, our housing stock and creating safe and healthy and affordable homes for Allegheny County. So know that there's a lot of stuff happening, a lot of resources right now. We want to help you be a part of that. This is our online interest form for our Healthy Homes checkups. I'll put this link, I'll include this all whenever I send this over to Abby as well. And that is really it. And I wanted to keep us at our hours, so I really tried to kind of breeze through those last parts.
Wow, you weren't kidding. That's a lot of information. This is one that I'm just gonna once the recording downloads, I'm just gonna watch it again, because that is just so much good stuff. I'm gonna be digesting this for a while.
Yeah, and thank you for letting us kind of take some of this time. And like I said, it is a lot. There's a lot of stuff we went through, we covered. So more often than not, there will be questions. And so my contact info is there. Like I said, we have our online interest form. You can always reach out through that as well. We have community health workers that are helping us navigate through the different healthy homes resources, and we rely on a lot of our partners too. And so know that if we can't provide it, we will find somebody who can.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Hannah. I'm really glad we were finally able to partner together and to kind of jump into the environmental issues together. I know it's something of huge interest to our people. So thank you so much for this super in-depth and thorough presentation.
Yeah,
I'm loving it.
absolutely. And one other thing I'll just plug is that we are always pushing out new information through our social media and our website too, around different ways that you can get involved in the advocacy part of this too. So whether that's asking our state representatives to pass certain bills or different things like that. So there's always different ways, not only just in your home environment, but from the larger kind of advocacy place that we're always looking for people to get involved in. So know to check those out too.
Great. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.